I turned 50 the night everything finally clicked. My name's Grant, and I've spent most of my life being the family's afterthought. You know that invisible middle child stereotype? Yeah, that was me, except I wasn't even in the middle. I was just there. My younger brother, Brian, was the golden one. Always had been. When he got a C, it was because the teacher was biased. When I got an A, it was finally. He got a car at 16. I got to borrow it when he didn't need it. He crashed it 2 months later, and somehow I ended up blamed for not reminding him about oil changes. That's the kind of family dynamic we had. So when my 50th birthday rolled around, I didn't expect fireworks. I didn't even expect sincerity. My mom was the kind of woman who could turn any moment about someone else into a celebration of her sacrifice. My dad was quiet, passive, the sort who avoided confrontation by pretending not to hear it. And Brian, well, Brian had a talent for timing. If I won an award, he'd announce a new job. If I got engaged, he'd accidentally get engaged 2 weeks later. Even at my own wedding, he made a toast that ended with, "But let's not forget," without me introducing them. They wouldn't even be together. Still, I wanted to believe this birthday would be different. 50 felt big. A milestone. Maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me with a bit of warmth. My wife, Julia, insisted I book a nice restaurant, one I'd always wanted to try but kept pushing off. "Let's celebrate you properly," she'd said, squeezing my hand. I loved her for that. She'd been my anchor through all the years of being quietly dismissed. The restaurant was one of those high-end places where they bring out tiny plates and charge you for the air you breathe, but I didn't care. It was my night. I walked in wearing a navy suit, feeling, dare I say, good about myself. The lights were warm, the music subtle, and the table was set perfectly in the center of the private dining room. I spotted my parents first, Mom waving dramatically like she was the star of a Broadway play, Dad smiling politely beside her. And then Brian. Tan, confident, that rehearsed grin that never reached his eyes. "Grant, happy birthday, big brother," he said, pulling me into one of those half hugs that's really a pat down for dominance. "Man, 50. You don't look a day over 49. He laughed at his own joke, and everyone else joined in. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn when you've spent a lifetime not wanting to ruin the mood. "Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it." The dinner started off pleasant enough. Wine flowing, polite conversation, Mom telling the waiter her life story like she was auditioning for a documentary. But I noticed something as the night went on. Every time someone mentioned me, Brian found a way to pivot the attention back to himself. When Dad said, "We're proud of what you've accomplished, son," Brian chimed in, "Yeah, success runs in the family." When Julia mentioned how hard I'd worked to build my company from the ground up, Brian cut in, "Speaking of building, my real estate investments are doing amazing this year." Even Mom giggled and said, "Well, Brian's always had that business sense. You got that from me." I glanced at Julia across the table. She caught my eye and gave me that small, knowing look, the one that said, "It's starting again." I could feel my chest tighten, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned that arguing with Brian was like trying to reason with thunder. You just end up getting struck. Then came the moment that sealed the night in my memory. The waiter rolled out the cake, a 3-tiered chocolate masterpiece that Julia had custom ordered. Candles flickered, everyone clapped, and for a split second, I felt seen. The song started, voices overlapping in messy harmony, and I closed my eyes, making a wish. I didn't wish for money or luck, just peace. But before I could even blow out the candles, Brian stood up. "Wait, wait, before you cut the cake," he said loudly, raising his glass. Everyone turned to him, confused but smiling. My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. Too cheerful, too rehearsed. He clinked his spoon against his glass and continued. "I think we should also take a moment to celebrate something else tonight. It's been a huge week for me." He paused dramatically, letting the suspense build like he was hosting a reality show. "I just bought a new house." The table erupted in cheers. My mom gasped, "Oh my baby, I knew you would," and rushed to hug him. Dad laughed proudly. Even the waiter smiled awkwardly, not sure whether to clap. And me? I just sat there, the candles still burning in front of me, the wax dripping slowly into the frosting. Brian grinned wide. "Yeah, it's this gorgeous place on Meadowbrook Lane. 5 bedrooms, pool, great neighborhood. I've been keeping it a secret until the papers were signed." Mom dabbed her eyes. He's always been the star, she said, her voice thick with pride. Always destined for greatness. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was quieter, heavier, like realizing you've been standing in the wrong line your whole life. I stared at the cake, untouched. Everyone was clapping, laughing, talking about Brian's new house and my name. My birthday was gone from the conversation. Julia leaned toward me. Grant, she whispered softly, resting her hand on my knee. I smiled. Or maybe it was more like I put on the mask I'd worn for decades. It's fine, I murmured, voice steady. He needs the spotlight more than I need the moment. But I wasn't fine. Not really. Not anymore. The rest of the dinner blurred together. I heard Brian boasting about square footage, Mom asking if there was room for future grandkids to visit, Dad muttering something about refinancing options. I laughed at the right times, nodded politely, and pretended the ache in my chest was just indigestion. When the bill came, Brian even joked, "Hey Grant, since it's your birthday, you're covering this, right?" Everyone laughed. Everyone except Julia. She looked like she was biting her tongue hard enough to bleed. On the drive home, silence filled the car. The kind of silence that hums. Finally, Julia said, "He stole your night." I exhaled slowly. He's been stealing my nights since we were kids. She turned to me, her eyes fierce even in the dim light. "Then maybe it's time you stop letting him." I didn't respond right away. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Her words echoed in my head like a challenge I'd avoided too long. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Brian's new house wasn't entirely his. And the irony? The name on that deed was about to turn his little celebration into something unforgettable. That was the night I stopped being invisible. And as I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, a calm, deliberate thought formed in my mind, slow, precise, unshakable. It was time to give him the kind of attention he'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, like I always did. Old habit from years of building my company. Early mornings, long hours, no handouts. I made myself coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to let the cold air wash away the taste of last night. But it stuck, that bitter mix of humiliation and déjà vu 50 years old, and I still felt like that awkward 12-year-old who watched his little brother unwrap my Christmas present because Brian just wanted it more. Julia came out a few minutes later, wrapped in my robe, her hair messy and eyes tired. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I shook my head, staring at the steam rising from my cup. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard him say it again. "Let's also celebrate me." Like my birthday was just a prelude to his announcement. She sat beside me, quiet for a moment. "You've let them do this for too long," she finally said. "You let your mom rewrite history, your brother take credit, your dad stay silent. And every time, you just smile through it." I didn't argue, because she was right. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, avoided conflict, told myself that keeping the family together was worth swallowing my pride. But last night, watching Brian steal my moment, I realized something. Peace doesn't mean silence. It just means everyone else gets to keep talking. I spent that weekend thinking, not just about Brian, but about all the times my parents had made it clear who really mattered. When Brian wanted to start a landscaping business at 22, my parents gave him $30,000. When it failed 6 months later, they told everyone, "At least he tried. He's ambitious." When I asked for a small loan at 25 to buy equipment for my contracting company, my mother scoffed, "You think we're made of money?" So I worked nights, saved, and did it on my own. My company grew, slowly, painfully, but I never flaunted it. Maybe that was my mistake. In my family, humility looked like weakness. 2 weeks after my birthday, Mom called. "Grant, sweetheart, we're all going to Brian's new house this weekend. He wants to host a family dinner and show everyone around. Isn't that exciting?" I hesitated. "Did he invite me?" "Of course," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "Your family. Don't be petty." Petty. That was her favorite word for me, her shield whenever she didn't want to admit favoritism. I almost said no, but something in me wanted to go. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. I needed to see it with my own eyes, the house he bragged about like it was his crowning achievement. Saturday came. Julia and I drove over, the GPS leading us through a quiet upscale neighborhood lined with manicured lawns and imported cars. The kind of place that screamed new money. When we pulled up to the address, I recognized it immediately. Meadowbrook Lane. I'd been there before, twice, actually. Once to inspect the foundation for the renovation project, and again to finalize the property paperwork. Because, you see, that house wasn't just familiar. It was mine. Technically, the house belonged to an investment LLC under my company's name. I'd bought it a few months earlier as part of a rental portfolio expansion. It wasn't unusual for me to acquire properties anonymously through the company for tax purposes. Brian had no idea. Julia glanced at me as I parked across the street. "You're quiet." I smiled faintly, just thinking how poetic life can be. The front door opened, and there he was, Brian in a fitted polo, sunglasses perched on his head like he was starring in a real estate commercial. "Grant." "Julia, glad you made it." The house was filled with laughter and noise. Cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone crowding the space like it was some royal debut. Mom was near the kitchen, showing off the marble countertops as if she'd designed them herself. "This is your house, Brian?" Uncle Rick asked, wide-eyed. "Wow, you've outdone yourself, kid." Brian beamed. "Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Hard work pays off, right?" I almost laughed. Hard work. The man's biggest achievement until now was avoiding actual work. Mom turned to me, hand on her hip. "Grant, don't look so serious. You could learn a thing or two from your brother. He's always had drive." Julia stiffened beside me, but I placed a hand on hers, silently telling her to let it go. "Not yet." We took the tour, the open-concept living room, the spacious backyard, the guest suite. Every corner reminded me of the meetings I'd had with contractors, the permits I'd approved, the notes I'd signed. My signature was on nearly every document that made this house possible. At one point, I walked into the study, a room with built-in shelves and a huge window overlooking the lawn. There was a stack of envelopes on the desk, one of them addressed to the LLC name I used for the property. I recognized the logo instantly. "Everything okay, Grant?" Brian asked behind me, his tone casual but watchful. "Just admiring the place," I said, smiling slightly. "You really went all out." He grinned. "Yeah, well, when you've got the right connections, things move fast. Not everyone's cut out for big investments like this, you know." I nodded slowly. "Guess not." Later that evening, during dinner, Mom raised a toast. "To my son Brian," she said, glass high and voice proud, "who's finally settled into a home worthy of his potential." Everyone clapped. I set my fork down, staring at my plate. Julia leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" "Fine," I murmured, but my pulse said otherwise. Brian smirked across the table. "Don't look so tense, big bro. Your time will come. Maybe when you stop overthinking everything and just go for it." The table laughed. It was the same dynamic as always, Brian dazzling the room, me cast as the responsible, boring one. And the worst part? They liked it that way. They needed someone to be the dull contrast to Brian's golden glow. But that glow was borrowed light, and I was finally ready to take it back. The next few days, I played it calm. I went to work, met with clients, managed projects, all while quietly preparing. I didn't tell Julia everything yet, just that I was working on something. She trusted me enough not to ask more. Then the calls started. First from Mom. "Sweetheart, Brian's having some trouble with the paperwork for the property taxes. He says something about a mix-up with the deed. Could you take a look?" A mix-up. Interesting. Then from Brian himself, the next day. "Hey man, just a small favor. I think the county office messed up the registration on my house. There's this company name showing up on some documents. Yours, I think. Weird, right? Probably a clerical error." "Probably," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Send me the paperwork. I'll check it out." When I got the email, I opened the attachments, and there it was. My company name, clear as day, right above the deed holder's signature line. Mine. Brian had been living in my house, throwing parties, boasting to everyone about his purchase, and never once realizing the paperwork never changed hands. He'd signed a rental agreement I'd written up for internal occupancy, thinking it was mortgage verification. He hadn't read the fine print. He never did. For years, Brian had taken advantage of my silence. But this time, his own arrogance had done the heavy lifting. I didn't confront him right away. No, that would have been too easy, too satisfying, too soon. I wanted him to dig himself deeper, to make his lies big enough that when they collapsed, everyone would hear the echo. So I played along. I showed up at family gatherings. I smiled when Mom bragged about Brian's latest milestone. I even congratulated him publicly, all while keeping my plans quiet. At one dinner, I overheard him telling an uncle, "Grant means well, but he's just not the risk-taking type. That's why I'll always be a step ahead." Julia later told me she saw my jaw clench. "He doesn't even realize he's digging his own grave," she whispered. No, he didn't. But soon he would. Because my 50th birthday hadn't just been a night of humiliation, it had been a wake-up call. And I wasn't going to let another decade pass being invisible. The moment was coming. I could feel it building, slow and deliberate, like pressure under glass. I just needed to wait for the right time to let it shatter. It took less than a month for Brian to cross the line, the kind of line that once it's crossed, there's no going back. I'd spent weeks quietly watching him bask in attention, soaking up every ounce of praise from our family. Every dinner, every call from Mom, every, "You should be more like your brother," jab. It was the same movie I'd seen my whole life. Only this time, I wasn't the passive audience member. I was the one writing the ending. The first crack appeared one Sunday afternoon when Dad called. He rarely called on his own. Usually, it was Mom putting him on speaker while she did the talking. But this time, his voice was low and uncertain. "Grant, your brother's got himself in a bit of a jam," he said. "Something about his new house and the bank." I kept my tone neutral. "What kind of jam?" He hesitated. "He says they're threatening to freeze his account until he clears up some issue with ownership verification. He mentioned your name, said you might have accidentally been listed somewhere on the paperwork." Accidentally. There it was again, that magical word Brian used whenever his recklessness backfired. "I see," I said. "And he wants me to fix it." "Well, yeah," Dad said awkwardly. "He's under a lot of stress. Your mother thinks you should help, since you're better with this stuff." I could practically hear Mom in the background, whispering instructions like a stage director. "Tell him not to overreact. It's just a mix-up." A mix-up. Always a mix-up, never accountability. I told Dad I'd look into it, and hung up. That same evening, Brian called. "Hey, man," he started casually. "We've got a little problem, but it's nothing major. The bank's just being ridiculous about the property title." "Uh-huh," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And what did you tell them?" "That we're brothers, and that you probably handled the closing paperwork under your company for convenience," he said quickly. "They just need you to confirm that I'm the rightful owner." Easy fix. I let that sit for a second. "Brian, you told the bank I handled your property under my company?" "Well, yeah," he said. "I mean, it's true, kind of. You were involved in the process, right? Look, I just need you to send them a letter verifying that the house is mine. That'll clear it up." "That would be lying," I said quietly. He paused. "No, it's just bending the truth a little. You know how paperwork is." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked around my office. The framed architectural plans, the company logo I designed 20 years ago, the first project photo still hanging crooked on the wall. Every inch of that room was built from work, not handouts. And now he wanted me to hand him legitimacy on a silver platter. "Brian," I said slowly, "you're living in a house you don't own. You've been parading it around like it's your big accomplishment, and you didn't even read the contract you signed. That's on you." He laughed lightly, that fake, dismissive laugh he used when he was cornered. "Come on, man, don't get dramatic. We're family. It's not like you're losing anything. Just fix it so Mom can stop freaking out." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "No." There was a long silence. Then he said, quietly but sharply, "You've always been jealous of me. You know that? You can't stand seeing me get attention." And just like that, I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe, finally, he'd realize he'd crossed a boundary. But Brian didn't back down. He never did. Instead, he doubled down. 3 days later, I got a call from my accountant. "Grant, I've got something strange here," he said. "Someone tried to file a transfer authorization for one of your LLC properties. The Meadowbrook one." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Yeah," he said. "They used an old digital signature template. It's a sloppy forgery, but the intention's clear. They're trying to reassign ownership to an individual named Brian Caldwell. That's your brother, right?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Send me the document." Now, when I opened the email, I felt my pulse quicken. The signature was mine, or at least, someone's attempt at it. Same slant, same spacing, but just slightly off. Like someone had traced it from memory. The rest of the form was filled out with confident handwriting, Brian's. He hadn't just lied. He'd tried to steal it. I stared at the screen, disbelief turning to a slow, cold anger. I'd dealt with betrayal before. Friends who took credit for my work, employees who lied, but never from my own brother, never this blatant. That night, I didn't tell Julia everything. Not yet. I needed to think clearly before emotions got in the way. But she could tell something was wrong. What happened? She asked softly as we sat in bed. He crossed a line, I said simply. And this time, it's not just words. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Mom answered the door with her usual dramatic flair, like I'd just shown up for a surprise reunion episode. Grant, what brings you here? Did you come to talk about helping Brian? Oh, thank God. I told your father you'd come to your senses. Where is he? I asked, stepping inside. She frowned. He's out running errands for the house. You know, being responsible. I turned to face her. Mom, did you know Brian tried to forge my signature on a legal document? Her eyes flickered, a quick, guilty reaction before her expression smoothed out. Oh, for heaven's sake, don't exaggerate. He said he made a small mistake trying to fix a filing error. I almost laughed. A forgery is not a small mistake, Mom. It's a crime. She crossed her arms, defensive now. You've always been so uptight. He's your brother. You can't just hold that over his head. If you really love this family, you'd help him out instead of threatening him. Help him out. I repeated, incredulous. By letting him steal from me? Her voice rose. He needs this, Grant. He's finally doing something with his life. Do you want to ruin it? That sentence hit like a punch, because it was the same one she'd used my whole life in different forms. Don't ruin it for him. Don't upset him. Don't make him look bad. I realized then that it wasn't just Brian. It never had been. It was the entire system that had been built around him. The blind worship, the excuses, the protection. I'm done, I said quietly. Mom frowned. Done with what? With pretending this family's definition of love isn't just control. I turned to leave, but she called after me, her voice sharp and shaking. If you go through with whatever you're planning, don't expect to be welcome here again. I stopped at the doorway, glancing back over my shoulder. Funny, I can't remember the last time I actually felt welcome. I walked out without another word. By the time I got home, Julia was waiting in the kitchen, her phone in hand. You need to see this, she said, her voice tense. It was a Facebook post, Brian, standing in front of the Meadowbrook house, arm around Mom, grinning wide. The caption read, Dreams do come true. After years of hard work and dedication, I'm finally a homeowner. Couldn't have done it without my amazing family support. Here's to new beginnings. The comments were flooded with praise. So proud of you. You deserve it. Finally getting what you worked for. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. He's unbelievable. Julia looked at me, eyes narrowing. Grant, this isn't just about him anymore. He's dragging your name, your work, your life into his fantasy. You need to do something. And that's when it clicked. The letter, the forgery, the post, it wasn't a coincidence. He was trying to rewrite the story before I could tell the truth. He was building a public image so loud that no one would believe me if I contradicted it. I'd always been quiet, measured, careful. He'd always been reckless, loud, careless. But this time, his carelessness had put him on my territory, the one place where I held all the cards, the paperwork. That night, I opened my files and began pulling every document tied to Meadowbrook. I double-checked ownership logs, tax records, digital signatures. I had everything, proof beyond question. But I didn't send them to anyone. Not yet. Because I wasn't going to expose him in an email or a phone call. No, Brian had humiliated me publicly, at my birthday, in front of family, online. And when it came time to reveal the truth, he'd learn exactly what it felt like to lose everything while everyone was watching. I just needed the right moment. And as fate would have it, that moment was already on the calendar. Mom's upcoming family celebration dinner that she'd been planning for weeks to toast Brian's success. Perfect. I marked the date on my phone and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading a family gathering. Because this one wasn't going to be about him anymore. It was going to be about the truth. The weeks leading up to Mom's family celebration dinner felt heavier than usual. like the air itself carried the weight of everything unsaid. On the surface, life went on. I still showed up to work, shook hands with clients, laughed at the right times, signed contracts, and played my part as the calm, dependable one. But under it all, there was this quiet storm brewing. I didn't show it, not even to Julia. But every time I scrolled past Brian's smug social media posts or heard my mother's voice bragging about her successful son, it twisted something deep inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was something older, deeper, a kind of grief. For the years I'd wasted trying to earn their approval. For every time I'd swallowed an insult and told myself it wasn't worth fighting. For all the dinners where Brian was the star and I was the afterthought. I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at me. The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my office, the only light coming from the monitor where the documents glowed faintly. The deed, the ownership certificate, the bank filings. All in my name. Ironclad. Untouchable. I could have exposed him then. One email, one phone call, one screenshot to the right person, and Brian's little empire of lies would have collapsed overnight. But I didn't press send. Because part of me, the part that had always wanted peace, still hesitated. I wanted to believe there was some way to make them see reason without blowing everything up. I wanted to believe that family could still mean something. Julia came into the office around midnight, her robe loosely tied, hair falling across her face. "You're still up," she said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She came behind me, resting her chin on my shoulder, her voice soft. "You've already won, you know. You don't have to prove it to them." I let out a long breath. I'm not sure it's about winning anymore. I think I just want to stop losing. She wrapped her arms around me. "Then maybe it's time you walk away." Her words lingered long after she'd gone back to bed. Walk away. Simple advice, impossible to follow. Because walking away meant letting them rewrite the story one last time. And I wasn't sure I could live with that. The next day, I got a call from Mom. Cheerful, rehearsed, fake as ever. "Sweetheart, don't forget the dinner tonight. Everyone's so excited to see you. And we're something nice. Brian's got a surprise planned." I smiled bitterly. "A surprise, huh? I'll be there." This celebration dinner was held at the same restaurant as my birthday, the one where Brian had stolen my night. There was something poetic about that. Julia noticed it too as we walked in. "They really don't see the irony, do they?" she whispered. The private dining room was already buzzing when we arrived. I could hear my mother's voice from down the hall before we even reached the door. "And Brian's been working so hard. You wouldn't believe the offers he's getting. Real estate developers are just begging him for advice." We stepped inside, and I felt every eye turn toward us. The same cast of characters, uncles, cousins, old family friends. Brian stood near the center, one arm around Mom, his other hand holding a drink like he was the guest of honor. "Grant," he called out, smiling too wide. "Glad you could make it, big bro." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, shaking his hand. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Hope there's no hard feelings about the paperwork mess. All sorted now." I raised an eyebrow. "Sorted?" He grinned. "Yeah, let's just say I know how to handle things when I need to. You'd be surprised what a few phone calls can fix." I didn't ask what he meant, but I would find out soon enough. Dinner went as expected. Mom made a toast about family unity. Dad sat quietly, nodding along, avoiding eye contact. Brian soaked in the praise, regaling everyone with stories about his house, his plans, his achievements. Julia sat next to me, expression neutral but tense. I could feel her hand resting lightly on my leg under the table, grounding me, reminding me to breathe. Halfway through the meal, Mom stood up, glass in hand. "Before dessert, Brian has something very special to share with all of you." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Brian stood, straightening his shirt. "Thanks, Mom. So, as some of you know, I've been getting involved with real estate investments lately. It's been a wild ride, but things are really taking off." He gestured toward a man sitting near the end of the table, a well-dressed guy in his 40s with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. "This is Mr. Adler, one of my new business partners. We've been working on expanding the Meadowbrook property portfolio. Big things ahead." The room murmured with approval. I froze. Meadowbrook property portfolio. My pulse spiked. Mr. Adler smiled politely. "Brian's been a pleasure to work with. The property's under his management now, and once the final transfer clears, we'll be setting up a full investment trust." Julia turned to me, whispering, "Final transfer?" I forced a calm expression. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "Need to step outside for a moment." In the hallway, I took out my phone and opened my company email. There it was, a new notification from the county clerk's office. Transfer of ownership in review. Attached was a scanned form. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Another forged document. My signature again, sloppier this time, but enough to raise suspicion. He'd done it again. And this time, he'd brought someone else into it, a stranger who believed the lie. For a moment, I just stood there, phone in hand, trying to process it. 50 years of being dismissed, humiliated, ignored, and now this. The final insult. Julia followed me out a minute later. "Grant." I looked at her, my voice low but steady. "He's trying to sell it. My property. To someone else." Her eyes widened. "He can't. He can't legally," I said, cutting her off, but that's never stopped him before. I walked back into the room just as Brian was finishing another story about his growing empire. The laughter felt louder now, the clinking glasses sharper, the air thicker. I sat back down slowly, watching him bask in attention like a performer unaware the curtain was about to drop. "Everything okay?" Mom asked sweetly. "Perfect," I said, forcing a smile. When dessert came, the waiter brought out a cake. White frosting, gold candles, the words "To New Beginnings" written across the top. The same waiter from my birthday, I realized. The same table, the same crowd, the same smug grin on my brother's face. But this time, something in me broke. It wasn't an explosion, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet breaking, the kind you feel in your bones. I didn't even finish dessert. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and said simply, "Congratulations, Brian." He looked at me, confused. "Leaving already?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Enjoy your night." Julia followed without a word. The car ride home was silent except for the sound of rain tapping the windshield. When we got inside, I went straight to my office. Julia lingered by the doorway. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" I didn't answer right away. I opened my laptop, pulled up the ownership documents again, and this time, I started a new file, a timeline. Every forged signature, every false claim, every lie. I organized everything meticulously. Finally, I looked up at her. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." For the next few days, I avoided calls from my parents. When Mom finally showed up at my house unannounced, she was furious. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family?" she demanded. "Brian's saying you're trying to sabotage him out of jealousy. He's heartbroken, Grant. Heartbroken that his own brother would turn against him." I almost laughed. "Heartbroken? He forged my signature twice and tried to sell my property." She folded her arms tightly. "He said it was a misunderstanding. You always twist things." I stepped closer, my voice calm but sharp. "You've spent your entire life making excuses for him. But not this time. This time, he crossed a line even you can't cover for." She glared at me, her voice trembling. "You're going to regret this." I looked her in the eye. "No, Mom. He's the one who will." When she left, slamming the door behind her, I stood there in silence. The house felt bigger, emptier. Julia came up behind me, sliding her hand into mine. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded slowly. "I'm done being the quiet one." That night, I drafted one final email, not to Brian, not to my mother, but to someone else entirely. Someone who could make sure the truth came out clean, publicly, and legally. Because Brian hadn't just betrayed me. He'd taught me exactly how much I'd been underestimating myself. And while I might have been at my lowest, disowned, dismissed, and betrayed, I knew one thing for certain. Rock bottom is the perfect foundation to rebuild on. Only this time, I wasn't rebuilding quietly. The morning after Mom's outburst, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because things were resolved, far from it, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win their approval anymore. The leash had snapped. No more guilt, no more quiet tolerance, no more pretending that keeping the peace was noble. I'd spent 50 years letting them write my story. Now, I was taking the pen back. I started the day like any other: coffee, a quiet breakfast with Julia, then a walk through the neighborhood, but everything felt different. Colors looked sharper, air felt cleaner, and even the silence wasn't heavy anymore. I wasn't the invisible one in the background of my brother's spotlight. I was the storm that had been forming behind it. At work, my focus sharpened. I'd built my company from the ground up, managing property development projects across 3 states. For years, I'd kept things modest, reinvesting profits, avoiding unnecessary attention. But now, I decided to expand. I met with my CFO, went through numbers, and by noon, I'd greenlit 2 new investment projects. For once, it wasn't just business, it was personal. Boss, my CFO, Martin, said with a grin as he looked over the projections, "You realize this'll double our valuation by the end of the year, right?" I smiled faintly. "Let's make it triple." As I drove home that evening, I passed through the Meadowbrook neighborhood, the one where Brian was still pretending to be king. The lights in his house were on, laughter spilling out through the windows. I parked at the curb for a minute, just watching. He had no idea that his world was balancing on a thread I controlled. And that thread was fraying fast. Julia joined me later that night in the living room. She sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping wine. "So, what's next?" she asked. I leaned back, a slow smile forming. "Next, we make things official." I'd already gathered every piece of evidence. The forged signatures, the fraudulent transfer attempts, the bank records, even screenshots of his social media posts falsely claiming ownership. It was all neatly organized in a single file, labeled Caldwell Holdings case. But before I used it, I wanted to build something bigger, something undeniable. Over the next few weeks, I started expanding my reach in the real estate scene. I attended investor meetings, reconnected with old clients, and quietly acquired 3 more properties under my company's umbrella. When people asked about my sudden momentum, I just smiled and said, "It's been a long time coming." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Brian was flaunting a house he didn't own, I was buying more without bragging once. A few weeks later, I received a call from a journalist I knew, an old acquaintance named Renee. We'd crossed paths years ago when she'd covered a community development project I led. She'd since moved on to larger stories, mostly about business and local finance scandals. "Grant," she greeted warmly. "It's been forever. What's got you reaching out now?" "Let's just say there's a story you'll want to hear," I said calmly. "About property fraud, family manipulation, and a man pretending to be something he's not." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "This sounds personal." "It is," I admitted. "But it's also verifiable. And I have proof." Over the next hour, I walked her through the story, omitting a few emotional details but providing all the facts. The forged documents, the false claims, the involvement of a potential investor, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "Grant, if half of this checks out, it's going to be a hell of a headline." "Just make sure it's accurate," I said. "I don't want drama. I want truth." "Truth sells," she said with a small laugh. "Leave it with me." That same week, things started shifting subtly around me. Calls from old friends I hadn't heard from in years started trickling in. Former clients reached out with new projects. Even a local bank offered to partner on a redevelopment loan. It was like the universe had been waiting for me to stop dimming my light for everyone else's comfort. Julia noticed it too. "You're different lately," she said one night as we had dinner on the patio. "How so?" "You carry yourself differently," she said. "Less like you're waiting for something to happen, more like you've already decided what will." I smiled. Maybe I finally did. Then, almost poetically, Brian called. His name flashed across my phone screen one afternoon while I was in a meeting. I ignored it. He called again 2 minutes later. And again. Finally, I stepped out and answered. "Grant, what is this about?" He snapped the second I picked up. "Good afternoon to you too," I said evenly. "The bank's freezing the house account. They're saying there's an ownership dispute." "What did you do?" "What did I do?" I asked calmly. "Brian, I didn't do anything. You forged my name, remember? Actions have consequences." He was silent for a second, then lowered his voice. "You're really going to do this to me? To family?" I let out a dry laugh. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't steal." "You're pathetic," he hissed. "You've always been jealous. You finally got your revenge, huh? Happy now?" "Not yet," I said softly and hung up. That same night, the article went live. Headline: Local investor faces fraud allegations after forged property transfer surface. Source confirms ownership dispute under investigation. It didn't name him directly, but anyone in our circle knew exactly who it was about. The article cited documents obtained from county records, and internal sources close to the property owner. Renee had done her job perfectly. Within 24 hours, the call started. "Mom first. How could you?" she cried. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to your brother?" "Maybe he should have thought about that before committing fraud," I said quietly. "Then Dad." His voice was tired, worn. "You didn't have to take it this far, son." I sighed. "No, Dad." He did. And then Brian again, this time from a blocked number. His voice was shaky now, not the smug confidence I was used to. "Grant, listen. I can fix this. Just call off whoever's leaking this crap, and we'll work it out." I almost felt pity. Almost. "Brian," I said, "you can't fix something you built on a lie." He swore under his breath, then hung up. Meanwhile, I was busier than ever. My company's name was suddenly in conversations that had never included me before. Other developers reached out, wanting to collaborate. Investors who'd once ignored my proposals now wanted meetings. It was like shedding the dead weight of my family's judgment had cleared a path forward. I spent more time at work, more time with people who actually respected me. Even Julia said she barely recognized me anymore, in a good way. "You look lighter," she said one night, curling up next to me on the couch. "Like you finally see your own worth." I smiled. Took me 50 years, but yeah, I do. The Meadowbrook situation was still unfolding. The bank had officially frozen the property account pending legal clarification, and the county registrar had opened an investigation into the fraudulent documents. I didn't have to do anything now. The truth was working for me. Then came the call that sealed everything. A real estate firm, ironically, the same one Brian had tried to impress with his investment empire, reached out to me directly. "Mr. Caldwell," the director said over the phone, "we've reviewed your portfolio and would like to discuss a partnership. Your recent projects are remarkable." It was validation, but more than that, it was power. The kind of power I'd spent a lifetime earning quietly while my family dismissed me as the serious one. Julia smiled when I told her. "You know what's funny?" she said. "They spent years calling you boring, and now everyone wants to be in business with you." Funny, I agreed. How truth has a way of catching up. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, a small Sunday brunch at Mom's insistence, the atmosphere had changed. When we walked in, conversations quieted. People looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with disinterest, but with a kind of uneasy respect. Brian was there, too. Pale, quieter than usual. His eyes met mine for a split second, then darted away. Mom fussed over him, pretending everything was fine. But even she couldn't fill the silence that followed when Dad muttered under his breath, "Sometimes the truth hurts." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat back and let the silence speak for itself. Because this wasn't revenge yet. Not fully. This was just the rise before the fall. And I was done being the quiet one who watched things happen. From now on, I'd be the one making them happen. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence from Brian. 2 weeks of strained phone calls from Mom asking if we could all just move past this. And 2 weeks of me pretending to be unbothered while, behind the scenes, I was preparing for the kind of closure that would finally rewrite 50 years of imbalance. The article had bruised his reputation, but it hadn't finished him. I knew my brother too well. He'd double down before he'd ever admit defeat. And sure enough, I started hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances. He was telling people that the article was fake news, that I'd sabotaged him out of jealousy. Some even believed him. I could have let it go, let the legal process handle everything, but that wasn't enough anymore. I didn't want just justice. I wanted clarity. I wanted every single person who'd ever looked at me like I was second best to see exactly who had been holding the cards all along. Then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. Mom called one evening while I was reviewing blueprints. "Sweetheart, Brian's having a little housewarming redo. You know, to remind people that everything's fine. He's inviting everyone, friends, family, clients, even that investor man who was so kind during the whole misunderstanding." I could almost hear her rehearsed innocence through the phone. "You should come," she added quickly. "Show support. It would mean a lot to your father and me." I leaned back in my chair. "Sure, Mom. I'll be there." Julia raised an eyebrow when I hung up. "You're going?" "Absolutely," I said with a calm smile. "I think it's time to make things official." Over the next few days, I quietly worked behind the scenes. I contacted my attorney, had the property records certified and notarized. I even reached out to Renee, the journalist, and asked her to hold off on publishing a follow-up until I said so. There was going to be a moment, one perfect, undeniable moment, where truth would take center stage and no one could spin it anymore. The day of the party arrived warm and cloudless, the kind of weather that almost mocks you with its peace. Julia and I pulled up to the Meadowbrook house just before sunset. Cars lined both sides of the street, luxury models, SUVs, familiar license plates from old family friends. Music thumped faintly through the windows. The whole neighborhood glowed in the amber light, and I couldn't help but think how poetic it was that the house itself, my house, would soon become the stage for its owner's undoing. When we stepped inside, it was déjà vu all over again. Laughter, champagne, the smell of catered food, and Brian in the middle of it all, grinning like a man who'd never known consequence. He spotted me instantly. "Well, look who decided to join the party," he said, approaching with open arms and a half-drunk glass of wine. "Guess you couldn't resist checking out the place again, huh?" "Something like that," I said. Julia's hand tightened around mine, a silent reminder to stay calm. Mom appeared from the kitchen, face lighting up in a way that was almost convincing. "Grant, you came. Isn't this lovely? Brian's done such a beautiful job, hasn't he?" I smiled faintly. It really is something. Dinner came and went in a blur of small talk and fake laughter. I didn't eat much. My focus was on timing. After dessert, Brian clinked his glass again, the same gesture he'd used at my birthday dinner. "Everyone," he announced. "Before we wrap up, I just want to thank you all for believing in me, even through, well, the recent drama." He chuckled like it was all a funny misunderstanding. "You can't keep a good man down, right?" The guests laughed politely. My mother smiled adoringly. I waited until the noise settled before standing up. "Actually," I said evenly, "that's not entirely true." The room quieted instantly. Brian's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a slow breath. "You said the recent drama was all just a misunderstanding. I think it's only fair that everyone here gets the full story, don't you?" His eyes flickered with panic for a split second before his confident mask slid back into place. "Grant, come on. Let's not make this awkward." "Oh, I insist," I said, reaching into my jacket and pulling out a neatly folded envelope. "You see, there's been some confusion about ownership of this house. And since everyone's already here, I figured it was the perfect time to clear it up." Julia handed me a small box from her purse. I opened it and pulled out a document, the original, notarized property deed. I held it up. "This," I said, "is the certified title for the Meadowbrook property. As you can see," I unfolded it slowly, letting the hush deepen. "The legal owner is listed right here." The room leaned in. I could feel every eye fixed on me. Brian took a step forward, his face pale. "Grant, what are you doing?" I looked at him calmly. "Just telling the truth." I handed the deed to Mr. Adler, the investor he'd bragged about working with. "Go ahead, take a look." Adler scanned it, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. Then he looked up at Brian, visibly uncomfortable. "This says, Caldwell Holdings owns the property. That's not your company." Whispers rippled through the room. Mom's smile faded. Dad stared at his drink. Brian stammered. That's outdated paperwork. We already transferred it." "No, you didn't," I cut in. "You forged my signature on transfer documents, twice. The county clerk confirmed it last week. The bank's already frozen the account, and the investigation's still open." Someone in the back gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Brian's voice cracked. "You're lying." "Really?" I asked, stepping closer. "Then maybe you can explain why the signature on those documents matches the one you used on your high school report cards when you forged Dad's name. Same angle, same stroke. You never learned subtlety." His face went blank. I continued, voice steady but louder now. "You wanted to humiliate me at my own birthday dinner. You made me invisible for years. But you made one mistake. You built your empire on property you never owned. So when you bragged to everyone about buying this house," I gestured around, "you were bragging about my investment, my deed, my name." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Even Mom didn't speak. Her eyes darted between us, disbelief and fear mixing like oil and water. Finally, I stepped back. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here to set the record straight. And now that everyone knows the truth, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening." I turned slightly, then paused. "Oh, and Brian, You'll want to check your mail tomorrow. There's an eviction notice waiting for you. You have 10 days to vacate my property. Gasps erupted again, but I didn't look back. Julia slipped her hand into mine, and together we walked out through the stunned crowd. As the door closed behind us, I heard my mother's voice break the silence inside. "Brian, is that true?" He didn't answer. Outside, the air was cool and still. Julia exhaled slowly, her voice trembling between relief and disbelief. "You actually did it." I smiled faintly, watching the house glow behind us like a monument to every lie that had finally collapsed. "No," I said softly. "He did it to himself." The car ride home was quiet, peaceful. For once, there were no words left to say. And though the night had been loud with revelation and consequence, inside me, everything was finally quiet. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop: calls, texts, voicemails. Half of them were from my mother, the other half from people who'd been at the party. Julia glanced at me over breakfast, her coffee steaming between her hands. "You're not going to answer any of them, are you?" I shook my head. "Not yet," because I already knew what the messages would say. Anger, denial, damage control, all the stages of panic from a family that had built their world on pretending. The first real confirmation came mid-morning when Martin, my CFO, walked into my office holding a folder. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely containing a grin. "The county finished processing the claim. The fraud investigation's officially closed. You're cleared, and your brother's name is on the incident report." I took the folder, flipping through the papers. Everything was there: the forgery evidence, the emails, the notary confirmations. Brian's signature, fake as ever, was now part of an official legal record. "So it's over," I said quietly. Martin nodded. "Over and documented. He's done." Later that afternoon, a knock came at my office door. Julia peeked her head in. "You might want to see this." She handed me her phone, and there it was, an article posted by Renee, the journalist. Headline: "Family businessman faces legal action for forged deeds. Sources confirm charges under review." This time, there were names. Real ones. Brian's included. The article was factual, unemotional, but devastating. It detailed how he'd falsified ownership transfers, attempted to defraud a bank, and misled an investor. And at the end, there was one line that hit harder than any accusation. When reached for comment, the legal property owner stated simply, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen." Renee had quoted me perfectly. By evening, my mother called again. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was sharp, brittle, and trembling all at once. "Grant, what have you done? He's ruined. The papers, the embarrassment. How could you do this to your own brother?" I stayed calm. "I didn't ruin him, Mom. He ruined himself. All I did was stop protecting him." "You could have handled this privately," she snapped. "You mean quietly?" I said. "Like every other time he lied or took something that wasn't his." "No, not this time." There was a long silence. Then, softly, "He's moving out. They sent an officer today. He's devastated." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. "He'll live." She sniffed sharply. "You're cruel." "No," I said, my voice even. "I'm finally fair." Then I hung up. 2 days later, I drove past Meadowbrook. The street was quiet except for a moving truck parked out front. Brian stood by the curb, arms crossed, face drawn tight with exhaustion and shame. For the first time in my life, he didn't look smug, just small. He noticed my car before I could drive past. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he walked over. "Here to gloat?" he asked bitterly. "No," I said. "Just to see if you needed anything." He laughed once, short and humorless. "Yeah, right." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "They all hate me now. Mom barely speaks to me. Adler's threatening to sue. My name's trash." "You did that to yourself," I said quietly. "But maybe it's time to start over." He looked at me, eyes bloodshot. "You always think you're better than me." "I never thought I was better," I said, meeting his gaze. "I just stopped pretending you were." He flinched. For a second, I thought he might say something back, but he didn't. He just turned and walked toward the house. When I drove off, I caught one last glimpse of him standing on the empty porch, the house behind him stripped of furniture, his reflection in the glass smaller than I'd ever seen it. The next week, life settled into something new. Peaceful, quiet in the right ways. The calls stopped. The gossip faded. My business thrived more than ever. Investors who'd once ignored me now sought my advice. Even Dad reached out, not to apologize, but to talk. "You did what you had to do," he said simply one afternoon. I should have seen it coming. Julia and I spent more evenings on the porch after that. She'd bring 2 glasses of wine, sit beside me, and we'd watch the sunset dip over the trees. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked once. I thought about it. About the years of silence, the insults disguised as jokes, the birthdays turned into someone else's spotlight. "No," I said. "I regret waiting this long." One morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside, a single note in Brian's handwriting. "You were right. I don't know who I am without being the favorite. Maybe that's my punishment. Take care of Mom and Dad. I'll figure myself out." No excuses. No apology. Just that. And for the first time, I actually believed him. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but closure. It was over. Truly over. A month later, I hosted a dinner of my own. Small, intimate, nothing extravagant. Just a few close friends, Julia, and my parents, who'd finally agreed to come. There were no speeches, no toasts, no grand announcements. Just good food, laughter, and quiet contentment. At one point, Mom looked across the table and said softly, "You seem happy, Grant." I smiled. "I am." She hesitated. "I never realized how much I, overlooked you." I looked at her, not with resentment, but with the calm understanding that comes from being free of someone's approval. "You don't have to say anything," I said gently. "Just see it now." When the night ended, I stepped outside onto the patio, the air cool and still. Julia came up beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said quietly, watching the lights flicker from the dining room window. "It finally does." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done." I nodded. Not for revenge. For peace. We stood there for a while in silence, the world finally still, the weight finally gone. And as I looked out over the horizon, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, the loudest revenge isn't anger or destruction. It's living well, without needing to prove anything anymore. Because the truth had done what I never could. It spoke for me. And this time, everyone listened.